Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next Work Together Wednesday. I have decided that today we are going to go over inequalities. I like talking about inequalities in terms of math and talking about them because if you get the hang of equations, inequalities aren't really that different. So if you're someone that you did well and you felt really strong about solving equations, inequalities shouldn't be that much different. So what I'm gonna do today is I'm gonna talk a little bit about some tips and stuff with that. I'll make a separate inequality video eventually. That way it's more concentrated. But for now, I'm gonna just start by talking about inequalities, what they mean, what they're used for, and also then go into my tips on how to work with them and how to know what things to do when you get to certain situations. So, whoops, let's zoom off. Just fix that. There we go. So, inequality tips. So, my first tip with inequalities is we're gonna talk about in terms of graphing. So, when graphing, you want to make sure that the variable is on the left. And the reason we do this is because we can then focus on making sure that we can use some shortcuts for doing our graphing. So if the variable is on the left, you can use these shortcuts that I'm going to talk about. So the next thing is that if you change the sides of your terms, you have to change the inequality. So if you flip terms, you flip the inequality as well. So if you're solving and you end up with your variable on the right, you can fix it so that the variable's on the left, but that's also going to include making sure to flip the symbol too. So if you do these two things first, then you can make sure that you do less to the left. So if you have less than or equal to or regular less than, you can go to the left. And greater to the right. So if you make sure the variable is on the left-hand side, then when you do your graphing, you can do less than to the left greater than to the right. So then the other one is open circle, closed circle. So less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, filled in, or closed. And the way that I would talk about this, and this is just going to kind of be a brutal thing, the line, there's more going on. So if there's more going on, you gotta fill in more stuff, which means you fill in your line for your shading and you fill in your circle. And then less than and greater than, open circle. I don't have another way that I say open circle. So those are the tips that I have in terms of your graphing shortcuts. So then the other thing that I have is that if when you're solving, you follow all the same steps as you would to solve an equation. And if it helps, something you can do is if you're really stuck, and like I said at the beginning, if you are someone that did well in solving equation, it might help to write your inequality as an equation and try and solve it that way, and then put your inequality back in, or do the steps side by side. So that's going to be a tip. I'm going to write that down too. Write the inequality as an equation. And solve side by side. Okay, so those are my main basic tips that I'm gonna follow. And then the last thing that I'll talk about, I will just kind of say that this is the last thing I'm gonna mention is one of the things that trips people up the most, but it's also the only thing that's kind of really new with the solving. And I'm just going to mention that as we're doing it, and I'll go in more depth because this isn't a specific dedicated inequality lesson video. This is just a work together day. So what I'll do is I'll just have that there and I'll talk about it. So let's solve some. I have a few examples for us to go through. So we'll just start with they go from easier to harder. So we'll just start with this one here. We'll do this. Alright. So I'm going to, let's do this. I'm gonna move it down here a little bit. So one of my tips was, if you struggle with solving the inequality, you write them side by side as an equation and solve the equation first. So if we wrote it as 4x minus 7 is, oops, I almost just rewrote the same thing, equals 1. That's the equation version. And if, like I said, if you did well with the equations, then you would know what to do for that. And most of the time, when you're doing the inequality, solving the inequality steps is identical to solving an equation. The only time it's different with the solving steps is if there's a negative number with your variable. That's the only time that the steps will be different, and it's the only time that it makes a difference as to what you do. But for us, for this, the steps we take are going to be the same no matter which one we're doing. So if you're used to equations and you are strong with equations, we have 4x minus 7 equals 1. You always undo, you do the opposite equations. The opposite of subtracting 7 is adding 7. And we gotta keep the equation equal, we gotta be balanced. So if we add 7 to one side, we gotta add 7 to the other side. For our inequality, this inequality, we do the same exact thing. So it's n minus 7, just like our equation, because I wrote the same thing. So we add 7 to both sides here. And on the left-hand side of our equation, negative 7 plus 7, so we can treat minus signs like a negative number. They equal 0, so they cancel out. Negative 7 plus 7 equals 0, it cancels out. So here we're left with 4x is greater than or equal to 1 plus 7 is 8. 4x equals 8. So with this, we took care of the addition subtraction. So 4x, remember, is 4 times x. The opposite of multiplying is to divide. So the opposite of multiplying by 4x would be to divide by 4. And then the same thing with our inequality, because it's the same thing. We just wrote it with equal sign instead to notice that it's the same as an equation. So x is greater than or equal to 8 divided by 4 is 2. X equals 2. So you'll notice here we got the same thing because it was literally the same steps. We just have one's the inequality, which was our question, and the other one is the equal sign. So that way, if you were struggling, you know what number you get. And if you follow these steps, then whatever you get for your final answer with your inequality will always match, even with the negative numbers. So these two would match. But the tricky part is what you do with your inequality symbol when negative numbers are involved. And the next question does have a negative number, so I'll be able to address that when I get there. So for our graphing, so one part of the graphing was make sure you have variables on the left, which we do have. So we're going to graph x is greater than or equal to 2. We have put our circle at 2, so I don't have my graphs labeled. I usually don't label them because I do a shortcut. And another shortcut that I have is, if you want to be really lazy about your graphing, is just draw this and then a single line and put whatever number you're using, because mainly all that matters is your number that you picked and then the shading direction. So sometimes what I'll do if I'm being really lazy about drawing a graph, if one wasn't provided for me, is I'll just draw this line, and then put that number in there with its tally mark. Yeah, so let's go with 0, 1, 3. Let's get rid of this one. Alright, so we put our circle at 2, and I'll shade with the red so that it's different. We have those lines, so there's more going on, so we gotta fill in more of our circle. And it's greater than, so greater than shades to the right. So the other thing that I do with greater than, the symbols with like arrows pointing in the direction to shade. But like I said, this trick only works if you have your variable on the left. So if the x was not on the left, we would not be able to use this trick. But it is. So we're gonna shade to the left. Sorry, to the right. Greater to the right. Our next one says 8 minus 2 n. I'm going to change that n to a... I'm going to just make them all. No, we'll keep it as an n. And I do notice that the purple that I'm using is slightly different than the purple used to create this. If that bothers anybody, I really apologize. So 8 minus 2n, so let's select it, move it down so we can solve it side by side with an equation. I need to move this down more. Oh. Right, so 8 minus 2n equals 26. So if you're used to solving equations, what we do to solve the equation will be the same for solving the inequality. So for this one, I have this question here, and I like to do questions like this. These, for examples with both equations and inequalities. We want to get the variable alone, so that means we need to get rid of plain numbers, constants, first. So we need to get rid of the 8 first. And then it's a positive 8, the opposite of positive 8 is negative 8, so we would subtract 8 from both sides. And because our expressions are the same, the only difference here that we have is our equal signs and our inequalities. Because our expressions are the same, all our steps are going to be the same. So 8 minus 8 is 0, so that cancels out. And then 26 minus 8 is 18. So the other thing that I usually do here is you want to make sure that you don't lose your minus sign, your minus 2. That minus sign is a part of your term. You don't want to lose that minus sign because that is a part of your term and it's going to change the outcome if you forget it. So make sure when you do that, you bring down the whole thing. So we're going to bring down negative 2n equals 18. Negative 2n is greater than or equal to 18. And that's negative 2 times n. Negative 2 times n, the opposite of multiplying by negative 2, is to divide by negative 2. So we're going to divide both sides by negative 2. That gives us 18 divided by negative 2 is negative 9. So we have n equals negative 9. But here's where the inequalities have one thing that's different, and that's if we divide by a negative number or multiply by a negative number. When we do that, it's going to flip our signs. It changes positives to negatives, negatives to positive. So we flip the sign of our number. We're also going to flip the symbol. So this inequality has to flip. So if you multiply or divide by a negative number, the number you write down twice, if that's negative, you gotta flip your symbol. So that becomes n is less than negative 9. So you'll notice once again, even though we had to keep track of that symbol is changing direction, the number we got by doing this is the same. So that's another thing you can do to check that you did your work correctly. If your equations are strong, solve the equation, and if you get the same number, then you did your math right. But if you missed points on your question, you might have forgot to flip your symbol. Flipping that symbol is one of the most common mistakes that students have. So if you keep getting the right numbers, but your symbol's messed up, just don't forget divide or multiply by negatives. You end up flipping your signs, so you gotta flip your symbol. So once again, it's an or equal to, so we're gonna have a closed circle, we're gonna have a filled in circle. And we'll do this as -7, -8, -9, -10. So we're gonna have a closed circle at -9. And this time it's a less than. Less than goes to the left. So on our next one that we have here, we have a strictly inequality, but we also have parentheses, so we gotta use distributive property. Remember, when we distribute, we're multiplying, because this is 2 times c minus 1. It's 2 times the whole thing, so we gotta distribute that 2 to both numbers. And I'm gonna do this distribution, and then I'm gonna do my rewriting of equations and stuff like that. So -2 times c is -2c. -2 times, because that says -1, we want to treat it like a -1. So -2 times -1 is +2. And then we have less than -22. So now that we have that, now I'll rewrite my equation. So we're going to solve -2c plus 2 equals -22. So with that, we can now take our terms and work on solving. So we want to take care of our constants first. So +2, opposite of +2 is -2. So we're going to subtract 2. So it's going to give us -2c equals. And then with this one, so this is another tip. I'll probably do some different videos on each of these as well. When we subtract from a negative number, we're going to get more negative. So more negative means we're going to go to -24. And I have found that thinking about it and saying it as more negative has helped a lot of students that I've worked with in the past trying to get the hang of their subtracting from negative numbers. Getting it more negative. And then we're going to divide both sides by -2. And we get that c equals 12. -24 divided by -2 is 12. So I did the whole equation this time. And I'm just going to copy the steps for the inequality, because remember, what we did for solving the equation will be the same as for solving the inequality. So opposite of adding 2 is subtracting 2. But then, as I mentioned in the previous example, because we have to divide by a negative, that -2, that's the one that I'm writing down twice, it's gonna flip our signs. So that -24 became a +12. It's flipping our signs, so we gotta flip our symbol. So it becomes c is greater than 12. C is greater than 12. So with that, we gotta put our circle at 12. This is a strictly greater than. So what I didn't mention earlier when I was talking about the inequalities, so or equal to means that number is a part of your answer. So in the previous questions, and this is still visible on the screen, I'll talk about that one. N is less than or equal to -9. -9 makes that or equal to part because -9 is equal to itself. So when we fill in the circle, that means we're saying that -9 is included in the answer. In this one, where it says C is greater than 12, 12 is not greater than itself. So since 12 is not greater than itself, we can't fill that in because it doesn't make the inequality true. So anything that's shaded is covering all numbers that make this true. And the reason we shade for inequalities is because inequalities cover a range of numbers, and for C is greater than 12, I could say that 14 is greater than 12. That makes that true. I could say that 12.3 is greater than 12. I could say 13.000001 is greater than 12. All those numbers are greater than 12. And because of how numbers work, your decimals can be any amount of decimal places, so we shade them in because it's impossible to just list or mark them. So shading in on the graph means that we get to cover all possible answers. And then remember, this is greater to the right. You look at the greater than symbol, if you put a line in there, it's an arrow to the right. So with this, these next two questions, we're going to cover my tip on making sure your variable's on the left-hand side. So here we have, in this one and the other one, we have a question with the variable on both sides. So once again, I'm gonna shift this. Actually, what I'll do, I'll shift the inequality, the number line up instead. So this is one that it will definitely be helpful to write it as an equation first. So we have 10 minus 11d is greater than -5d minus 4. So with this is where I said make sure your variable's on the left. Oh, I just rewrote the same inequality. It's supposed to be equals. So making sure your variable's on the left, that means usually if you're solving an equation, you have your pick of whether you want to move numbers to the right or the left. But with inequalities, I personally think that you should always make it a rule to move your variable to the left. So we want to take care of moving that -5d to the left. And when we move things across the equal sign or the inequality, we always have to do opposite operation. It's the opposite of subtracting 5d. Opposite of subtracting 5d is adding it, so we're going to add 5d to both sides. And remember, because it says -11, you want to treat it like a -11. So -5d plus 5d equals 0, so that cancels out. And then 10, the 10 is still here. -11 plus 5 gives us -6. So now we have -6d equals, once again, it said -4. You don't want to lose that minus sign. Since you don't want to lose that minus sign, it's still part of our number. So equals -4. So then what we have for this is now we have a regular expression. So we can continue like we're used to. So opposite of positive 10 is -10. If I subtract 10 from the left, I gotta subtract it from the right. 10 minus 10 is 0, so that cancels out. Do not lose that negative sign with the 6. -6d equals -4 minus 10 will get more negative. We'll get more negative, so it's going to become -14. And then we are going to have a decimal here, so we'll just, that's okay. So this is -6 times d. The opposite of multiplying by -6 is to divide. So it's going to give us d equals 2.3. Negative divided by negative is a positive. E equals 2.3. So once again, like I said with this, the steps, the overall steps are exactly the same for the inequality. So we start by adding 5d to both sides still. That's going to give us 10 minus 6d is greater than -4. We still subtract 10 from both sides. We get -6d is greater than -14. And then our main difference is what happens when we divide by that -6. So when we divide by a negative, we gotta flip our symbol, so that's gonna turn into d as less than 2.3. So with that one, I'm gonna use my shortcut. I'm just gonna write 2.3 at this spot. That means our circle goes here. 2.3 is not less than itself, so we cannot include that, so we can't treat in that circle. And less fades to the left. Alright, so we're gonna do one last example and then we'll see how that goes. And like I said, we're gonna use this example to emphasize the making sure we move our variables to the left. So we have 6w and 2w, and we want to emphasize that we want to move that variable to the left. So as I mentioned, like I said before, when you're solving the equation, you have your choice. So if you're somebody with the equations where you like to make sure you keep your variable positive, then you can pick which side you move your variable to. But with the inequalities, with the inequality calculation, you can still pick your side, but I highly recommend just making sure to move the variable to the left. So we're going to have 6w plus 3 less than 2w plus 15. So let's just do the equation first, highlighting that if you're strong with equations, the inequalities, the only time you have to make a note of what you're doing is with the negative numbers. So I'll move that 2w to the left. The opposite of positive 2 is -2. Since we're moving the full term, we're not undoing operations, we're moving the full term, we're going to use subtraction. 6 minus 2 is 4. So we have 4w plus 3 equals 15. Subtracting 3 from both sides, opposite of adding 3 is to subtract 3. And that's going to give us 4w equals 15 minus 3 is 12. And then it's 4 times w. The opposite of multiplying is to divide. So I divide both sides by 4. We get w equals 3. And then with this one, we didn't have any negative numbers involved. So for this one, we don't have to worry about flipping our symbol or making any changes. So we would start by subtracting that 2w. We would have 4w plus 3 is less than 15. Subtracting 3 from both sides. Gives us 4w is less than 12. And then divide both sides by 4. Since 4 is positive, we don't have to worry about making any changes to our inequality. So it'll just be w is less than 3. So it's a less than symbol, so we're going to shade to the left. Strictly less than 3 is not less than itself, so we cannot shade in the 3 to include it in our answers. So we shade to the left with an open circle. So just to recap here, key things. Make sure your variable's on the left. As long as you make sure your variable's on the left, you can use all of these shortcuts. If you have to flip your terms, so we did not do that in this part today. If you have to flip your terms, then you are going to have to flip your symbol. So let me do that up here really quick. So if we had done one of the questions and we ended up with 3 is greater than or equal to x. So as I mentioned, we want to make sure x is on the left. It is not. So if we want to make it so it's on the left, we can flip the x and the 3, but we flipped our terms. We flip-flopped them. So we have to also flip the symbol. Another way that I like to do this is whatever number or term the symbol is open to, it has to stay that way. So since in the original version, it was open towards the 3, if I move the 3, it needs to stay open towards the 3. So if you flip your terms, you gotta flip your symbol. Last goes to the left. That's a mnemonic, L and L. That's one that I think is really helpful. The last left, greater right, that only works if you make sure your variable's on the left-hand side. So last to the left, greater to the right. Greater does have an R in it, so if remembering that R is there helps you, you can do that. Less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. That means that your number that you got for your answer is a part of your solution set, so you can fill that in. And filling it in means you're including that number in the possible answers. Strictly less than, strictly greater than. You want to do open circle. Open circle means that you're not including your number that you got as your answer as part of the solutions, which is the case because, for example, like we had with C is greater than 12. 12 is not greater than itself, so we can't include 12 as one of the answers. if you are struggling to get the hang of inequalities, try reading the equation version side by side and do the steps with the equations, and then just make sure if you have the negative number, you apply that negative number trick to whatever you're doing. That is all I have for you today. So, hopefully, I was able to make these inequalities simpler for you. And next time,